testing procedures on that. We'll disconnect, and when we do that, we can always drain our hoses off too, so we're not spraying water everywhere. Sure I got them? Perfect. So that's a passing device then on those tests. So everything was good on that test. Again, tested our number 1 check assembly, doing direction flow, that measure test when we're bleeding water out. Did the back pressure test on the number 2. That's when we applied that pressure to the backside. Did our screwdriver test. Actually took that high side pressure, shut it off to make sure that our outlet shutoff valve was holding tight. Comes in really handy on larger devices too, by the way. Anything that's got NRS valves or OS and Ys can be hard to shut down. Very good way to test to make sure that you're doing it properly. That passed, so we knew everything was good, and we got a relief valve opening point. Nothing is dripping on the device, which is good. Sometimes we'll see people that will pass a device. It's passing, checks are good, relief valve open, but the relief still has a slight drip on it. If there is anything on this device leaking, it is a fail. So if you're going to do your test and it's dripping, just because your relief valve still opened a little bit higher when you did your test, but it continues to slightly drip when you're done, that is still a failure. The relief valve dripping is still a failure. So we can't pass anything, even if we see a little bit of a drip, we've got to fail that one. All right, so that handles this portion of testing. Anything else we missed?
I think we're good.
Pretty good on the basics here of the RPZ. Hopefully that makes sense. We do have literature here at Test Gauge of the testing procedures. So if you ever have any questions, you can reach out to us. We'll have our information up on the screen at the beginning and the end, Michelle, so that we've got that so that you can reach out to us if you don't have our information. And yeah, please do reach out with your questions. With that, we're going to shut her off and we're going to move to our next segment. All right, we're back with part 2 today, backflow day. So one thing we really wanted to kind of go over specifically was fire protection and backflow, how they relate together, different components on a fire system that as plumbers doing the backflow inspections, we need to know so that we can properly do our job. So a unique thing with Illinois is Illinois plumbers have to do all backflow tests and installations. So in Illinois, compared to other states, me as a licensed plumber, I'm the one that has to install and then test and maintain this backflow preventer on a fire system. All right, so as plumbers, when I first started this, I knew nothing about fire systems. Now, I'm still not an expert by any means, but I learned over the years some of the nuances of all these components, what works and what doesn't work. So we really wanted to touch on that. Our liability, our licensing law, I don't know what you would consider it, stops right here, right by Troy. So that number 2 shutoff on the backflow preventer on a fire system is where we stop. So everything up until this point is us as plumbers. Everything after that goes to your pipe fitters, alarm work goes to your alarm detection companies. But when we're working on these and we're testing these annually, we still have to work on certain components of these systems. So we want to discuss that today. We get a lot of phone calls, a lot of people just asking about how you do this, what you have to do with your operation when we're actually testing a backflow on a fire system. So we kind of wanted to give you the ins and outs of this. Again, we've got the live station here, so everything, all the components on here are actually hooked up and working, so we can kind of go through the live scenario. After we do that, we're actually going to test this as well. We just did our test procedures. Troy did an excellent job with our test procedures in the first round. And we're going to go through this, test a larger assembly so we can see it, and then we're also going to discuss these type 2 bypasses that are on these fire systems. Another huge question that we get about these from plumbers, plumbing inspectors, everybody in between, questioning what these single check bypasses are, how they're tested, what they do, and yeah, they're just a newer device that we haven't learned about. I didn't learn about them when I got my backflow license in 2011, and this is something that's just popped up more and more frequently in the last 5 years. So with that, we're going to get started on our fire system. So me personally, when I would go and test a device that was on a fire system like this, and I was lucky enough that I tested a lot of fire systems, more than I probably ever want to know or remember, definitely more than I ever remember. So first thing we got to do is, before we touch anything on this system, is our fire system has to be called out. So we always recommend, it's always recommended to have a building engineer, if you've got a building engineer, a building owner, if there's a building owner there, a manager, someone else call the fire panel out so that you don't have to do it. That way it's on them if it doesn't go back in service or something wrong. You can tell them what to do, and I'll give you those instructions, but let them take it out. It's much easier than you having to worry about it. Now, I wasn't always that fortunate because I went to a lot of buildings where there was either a lockbox code, there was nobody there, condo complexes where there was no one there, and so I had to take a lot of the fire panels out myself, which is what it was, but I had to get the job done, so I had to take them out. So the first thing we got to do is we got to get inside this fire panel. Inside the panel, written usually on the back side of the door, sometimes there'll be a sticker, it depends on what type of fire panel it is, but there will be a location number, and there should be the phone number of who is monitoring this exact panel. So it depends on what municipality you're in. Sometimes it's the actual municipality that monitors it, so you'll actually call into the fire department or police department. Like Elgin, we call it the police department. Chicago is fire. Most of them, though, when you get in the suburbs, are going to be monitored by an outside company. So this one, for instance, was monitored by ADT. This is a very common one, but ADT is a company that will monitor these. There's EM24. There's Red Center, which is a big one in the north central suburbs, north suburbs like Niles. Red Center's a difficult one because you have to have a passcode to take anything out. So you have to have an individual passcode. That's why it's nice to have a manager, building owner, someone on site take the fire panel out of service. So what we do is we call in the phone number. They'll pick up. We just say, I need to take a fire panel offline or take a fire panel out, however you want to say it. They'll ask for a position number, and then that's where we'll give them the position number. Like this one here is H43-016-1265. And they'll say, okay, and they'll probably repeat the address to you where you're at. And you'll say, yep, I'd like to take that out. They'll ask you for how long, just out of habit, because who knows what could happen. I'm there for a 20-minute backflow test, but I'd usually take it out for 2 to 4 hours, depending on what I was doing. If it was a repair, I would just tell them 8 hours. Now, I always called the fire panels back in when I was done. A lot of places will say, oh, you don't have to call just after the 2 hours or 4 hours, it'll go back in service. But I didn't want to leave that building without any kind of protection. So I always called when I was done, put it back in service. That way I knew I was done when I left it. So with that, we've got our fire panel called out. Now inside of here, we've got, it depends again on the panel, but we will have an alarm silence. There's a system reset. Some of them have an acknowledge, some of them just say silence. But we will have a certain set of keys in here that we can kind of quiet the system when we're working on it if it's a nuisance. Now, there's not that many times where we have the luxury of working on the fire panel when it's right by the backflow. A lot of times this can be in another room. It'll be up by a front door upstairs and we've got to walk downstairs. It'll be on the opposite side of the building. So at that point, we're just going to call it out, tell people, hey, you're going to have some beeping. Unfortunately, it'll be there for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and we'll try and get it shut back off. Some people don't like that. Other people deal with it, but we can run back and silence this panel if needed. So once we've got that done and the panel called out, big one, if it is somewhere near water, we're going to close the panel. Because there's nothing more fun than spraying water inside of a panel and costing yourself $8,000. It's happened before, many times. So these things have a mind of their own. This thing can, relief valve can go on a full dump. We're bleeding out test cocks. We do not want to spray the system with water, so we'll shut that panel back off. Now that we've got our panel called out, now we can go ahead and start working on the system. So, plumber's best friends, tamper switches. These larger valves, OS&Y valves, will have these tamper switches, which are installed on the OS&Y, and tampers are doing exactly what their name is. They're providing an alert or an alarm, or we call it a supervisory signal, back to the fire panel, which goes to the monitoring company, showing that someone is messing with the control valves on the fire sprinkler system. Obviously, common sense, if we shut these down and leave them off, we've got no water going to that fire sprinkler system and it cannot do its job. So these are just supervisory signals to let someone know that, hey, someone's messing with these gate valves or shut-off valves on the system, whether it be an OS&Y or a butterfly valve, which also has built-in supervisory switches, which will do the same thing. So now that we're good, before we close this too, something else I thought about, let's hook up just a bypass hose real quick on this Troy. Now, I don't have this system yet. We're gonna go on the number 4 test cock here. Now, at some point in time, I wanted to try and get a dry valve installed on here. This is another big question that we get from plumbers. So this here is, we would call this just a wet system, ordinary wet system, no fire pump. This is our kind of makeshift riser here. Flow switch we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then this would go up to our system. There are other systems which are called dry systems, becoming more popular in the Chicagoland area because they don't need to use antifreeze. What these dry systems are is they've got this giant valve up top. And what they'll do is the water will only go up to this valve, and then beyond that it's all compressed air. There'll actually be a compressor on the wall, and what they're doing is this is going into unconditioned spaces. So KinderCares are a big example of this. A KinderCare is basically built like a house, rafters. So they run the fire sprinkler lines up in those unconditioned areas in the rafters, and they have to fill those with compressed air because obviously water would freeze. These dry valves are very sensitive. So they've got compressed air pushing back down, and then they've got water pushing up on this side. What can happen, and why plumbers are hesitant of these, and I was lucky that I was taught this because I never actually tripped a dry valve, but I've heard a lot of guys that have done it before. So I was lucky I learned through their mistakes. I never did it, or I never tripped one. But guys will ask, what do we do to prevent that? The best thing that you can do to prevent that is before you close this number 2 shutoff valve, bleed off your number 4 test cock. So Troy hooked up a hose here. I'm actually going to open this. I'll try to hold it. I was going to have him close this. But right now I'm running water out of this number 4 test cock. Hooking a hose up is the best way. Throw it in your drain through your RPZ. And it doesn't have to be a lot of water either. Ooh, we got some air in this too. Another good reason to bleed stuff off. There we go. Now we got all the air out. So what we're doing is we're basically taking all the pressure off of the backside of this system. After our number 2 check of that dry valve is a closed system. What we're doing by opening this is we're just taking that excess pressure off, and now we can go ahead and close this number 2. And we're going to beep here. I'm going to let you guys be annoyed here for a few seconds. And we're going to close that down tight. I'm going to shut my water back off on my number 4 test cock. And I'm going here, I'm going to silence that system. I'm going to close that tight. And now I've got the water off because we do have to have that number 2 shutoff valve closed. But now we've got the water off. And basically what I've done, why those dry valves trip, what happens is with this closed system, when we actually close this OS&Y, that wedge that's inside that boot starts to push down and actually increases the pressure in this little closed area here. And that's what causes that dry valve to pop. So if we have water running out of this number 4 and we're taking that pressure off, we don't have to worry about that dry valve popping. Now I know it's a bit overkill, but I just got in the habit of a fire system because you're in rooms and there's so much stuff on these walls, and I'm not a fire guy, I have no idea what this stuff is. So I just got in the habit, every time I shut down a fire system, I would do that same thing. If it was in a room that there was a floor drain and it was already pretty much a mess, I would just open up that number 4 test cock just a little bit, get a little water flowing out of it, and then close my number 2 shutoff. Just got in the habit of doing it, that I never had to worry about tripping a dry valve that might be in the system that I didn't know what it was. All right, I hope that makes sense. Again, any of the stuff that we're going over, questions, just call us and we can run over that one. So.